Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you are watching live or you're watching the recording. I appreciate you tuning in and watching. So this week we are starting Module 5, and we're going to be looking at browser developer tools, which are tools that are built into our browser that can help us improve websites. I've got some slides here that we're going to be looking at, but we're going to be spending a lot of time basically just looking at the tools in the browser. And, I kind of want you all just to kind of follow along with a lot of the module material as well as you're kind of working through this. So what we'll probably do is we'll have a shorter sort of live class this week, and then next week there'll be a bit of a longer one probably, or we'll see how next week kind of plays out. We'll play it by ear, see what we kind of do here as we kind of go through the different elements panels and all that different sort of stuff. Right. I don't normally work in Chrome, but I will be working in Chrome for the purposes of the demonstrations in this module, since that is, I think, the majority of what everybody uses, either Chrome or Firefox. Typically, I use Opera, which is a Chromium-based browser now, so it would have the same sort of tools on it. But even in Firefox or Edge or whatever you choose to use as your browser nowadays, basically every modern browser has this same set or a very, very similar set of tools. So we're going to talk about some browser developer tools, and then I think next week what I want us to talk about is Lighthouse specifically. So that's what we'll do. We will sort of look at the regular tools this week. Just go through, have a look at them. Just take as long as we need to look at them. And then next week, as we're wrapping the module up, have a look at Lighthouse in particular, which is a part of our Chromium-based browser developer tools, which are really, really good. Right, and if you're not using your browser developer tools, you really should be. You should be taking advantage of these browser developer tools and using them really in every website that you build. They really, really help you out and improve your website. They help make things a lot more apparent and clear as you're working on them. And they can also help you solve problems and figure things out when you're working on things with issues. Right, so the first thing that I want us to look at is the Elements panel. One of the things that we'll be looking at are the different panels. And, I have some screenshots kind of built into this presentation here, but, kind of the further that we get away from it, like the screenshots look a lot different. The actual tools themselves don't really work very much differently, right? Just, the screenshots of the UIs get updated and they look a whole lot different. And we're able to, work with things and highlight things and examine things in a very, very different way. At one point it basically looked like this. I mean, it still more or less looks the exact same, right? This is a screenshot from a Mac, as you can tell by the bar at the top, right? And these are our Chrome developer tools. And this is actually from the Google Developer Network. This is from the website that, basically explains the developer tools. And this is our, we see along the top here, we see the different tabs that are involved and the different tabs that we can use, or at least most of them there, right? You see the double arrow there at the end of the right-hand side there. That shows us that there's a few more things here than we might be anticipating, but in general, we see the majority of the tabs here that we have set up. And by default, we have our Elements tab, which is our basis. And this is, basically with our Elements tab, we use that to look at the code that's on a page. We can also look at it to see what CSS styles have been applied to a page. Right, so in this example that we're seeing here in the top part of this window, that's the HTML that's on the page. In the bottom part of the window, we see on the left-hand side, we see CSS rules that have been applied to this page. And on the right-hand side, we see box model for whatever particular element is highlighted in the upper part of the window. Right, and so in that instance, in the upper part of the window there, we see that the body tag, the opening body tag is highlighted. And so in that lower right-hand part of the window there, in that bit of documentation, what we are seeing there is the box model information for the body of the site that is currently being displayed in the particular viewport that the site's displayed in. So that is one of the things that we want to remember as we are approaching these concepts, is that, a lot of the information that you get, especially from this panel, is going to be viewport based, right? When you're looking at your box model there, especially, a lot of that information is going to be viewport based, right? And it's going to change as you resize your viewport, since, a lot of elements are responsive, right? When I change the width of my browser, it's going to, reflow the width and the height of the elements on my page. So, for example, in that box model there, we see in the very center there, that blue content box, we see a width of 660 pixels and a height of 7,294 pixels. And if I want to be more specific, 7,294.2 pixels. And if we look at things in the grand scheme of things, right, 660 pixels wide is actually relatively narrow, especially in terms of modern browsers, even in terms of old, browsers and monitor sizes, right? So we can assume that the person who's taken this screenshot actually has their browser window resized and narrowed. And when we look at our examples here in just a brief moment, we'll be able to see those things change. But that's actually giving us box model information. So that's showing us the width, the height, the amount of padding, the amount of border, the amount of margin on whatever particular element is highlighted in our HTML at the top. Which, if you remember box model from Web 115 and CTI 110, when we discussed it there, right, you remember the importance of all of that, of, trying to determine the amount of real estate this particular element takes up on a page. It could also, help us kind of determine some potential layout issues of things that are going on a page, right, and all that sort of stuff. And then on the left-hand side of the page, these are the CSS rules that are being applied to the highlighted section. So if I were to go into Chrome, right, and so I have Chrome right here. Let's bring up Chrome. And we were to go into any website. Let's go into the Cleveland Community College website. So let's go on over to clevelandcc.edu. So we have our Cleveland Community College website here. I can right click and I can select Inspect from that menu. And I get my Inspect menu here on the right hand side of the page. If I scroll all the way down here, I get to that box model menu here. We can see that I have this random div that's selected here in the middle of the page. That's just because that's where I right clicked, just randomly on the page. When I right clicked, it fell within that content area. And when I hover over that, it shows me the different areas of the box model that are taken up by this element. We can zoom in on that there quickly so we can see that. We can see that this particular element has a width of 973.625 pixels wide and 546 pixels tall. And we actually have a negative margin on this element. For some reason, that seems a bit strange that we have a left and right negative margin here. But it is something that has been applied to this element. Now, by default, you typically see this show up on the left-hand side like this. You can change the orientation and the layout of this. If you see, there's a little context menu here, a 3-dot menu, and then it allows you to move it around to different sides. You can pop it out and undock it onto a separate window. You can move it to the left. You can move it down to the bottom, which would be sort of similar to how it looked in the other window, right? I think in the other window it was undocked, so it would have been pushed out like this. So we'll kind of leave it undocked so we can look at things separately here. Or you can, have it to the right, which is the default. So I can find my body tag here on this page and click it. You can see that highlights the whole page. That gives me all of my CSS rules for the page, and it also gives me my box model down here at the bottom. For my body tag, we can see there, once I have a different element selected, that it actually changes the rules that I'm given here for my body tag, right? It's 1,903 pixels wide by 2,777.160 pixels tall. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this particular panel, in particular our Elements panel, is that we can actually edit things in our Elements panel and see the edits show up on the page. Right, so this is a good way to make some temporary edits to our websites to see, well, maybe what would that look like if I did this, or what would that look like if I did that? Or it's a good way to kind of play around with, other websites that exist and play around with them and change things on them to see, what making changes would make that website look like. Right, because since it's being done in the browser, HTML and CSS, these are client-side interactions, right? So they're only being done in your browser, so they're not impacting anything that is on the server side. Right, so at the end of the day, you can make all the changes that you want and refresh the site. And you get some information about, the site just goes back to the way that it was. Right, which is pretty cool. And I can do that either in the HTML or in the CSS. Right, so for example, I can just kind of go through here and highlight and look around. Try to find different elements. You can see as I move through the HTML, different things sort of highlight and unhighlight. This is the div for the question box down here, it looks like. So we can probably do some work with it. See what's going on there. Sometimes you might not see all the information for a specific HTML element because it is collapsed. It's trying to save room there, so you might want to expand it out. Right, so there's the button. So what I might want to do is just look through and try to find the information for the button or whatever I want to find the information for. And then I can make changes to it. Right, like here I found the text for the button. It says right here, questions ask Chip. I can actually change that, right? I can double click that text there and I can change that text to what I want the text to say. Ask me your questions. And when I hit enter, it actually changes it on the site, right? You can see now that I've changed the text on that button, right? And if you've seen, a lot of the, when people fake screenshots and stuff like that, a lot of the times, this is one of the ways that people will do that, right? Because it's one of the easiest ways to make a convincing fake screenshot. Because I can fake the information by changing the text in the Inspect Element panel. Minimize this, take the screenshot, and then, it basically looks real because it's, all the real code behind it, all the real code making the styling for it. Just different text that I added onto there. And, that's one of the, that is one of the issues that we kind of just have to deal with as we're, thinking about the idea of the fact that, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of these items, it's rendered by our browser. So since it's rendered by our browser, that means things are controlled on our browser's end, which if it's controlled on our browser's end, it means that, it's stuff that we can go in and edit and make changes to because it's all within our sphere of influence. It's all within things that we can control, right? If I find the button in particular, right, I can see the color for it, right? Here's that CSS color for it. 78BC44. I can change that to something like red, right, and make it red. So now it's red, as you can see down there in the corner. We also have the text color here for it. They used RGBA, which is kind of interesting to me that they've actually upped the alpha for it instead of making it an actual color that would be close. You know, ideally what we would want to do there is we'd want to, you know, work with something to darken the color or lighten the color a little bit, you know, using code or whatever we were doing there, instead of lowering the alpha, because that's going to lower our contrast, but that's going to be good enough here for our purposes to be able to deal with this. I mean, it does have its own value to it, because it does, you know, allow it to take on the hue of whatever's colors underneath, even if it's not perfectly contrasty as far as all that goes. But I can make changes. I can fix things. I can kind of do some what ifs and make some changes based on, you know, what if I wanted to do this? What if I wanted to do that? Which is really effective in terms of, you know, making decisions for web design and web development. Because, you know, I don't necessarily want to go into my code and make code changes that I have to change back and resave and re-upload every single time I want to, you know, make us, you know, see something change on my site. Right, I might just want to see a little change, see what it looks like. And so by using the elements panel here, I can see all the elements. I can see their HTML. I can see their CSS. I can see how they interact with one another. I can see the box model. For each of the elements, and I can see, you know, whether or not that overlaps with anything, or whether or not it's causing any positioning errors. Right, so it's good as far as that goes for troubleshooting, which is highly beneficial. And then, you know, once I'm done, right, once I'm done looking at everything, getting some ideas here of what I want to do, I can just simply refresh my page and everything's back to normal. Right, another thing that I can do here with this is I can click this HOV button here to see things in different, to force different element states. So I can force active states or focus within states, or even hover states. So this is good to see, you know, hover CSS without having to hover your mouse. So if I click in this box here and click the hover states, I can force hover states for elements. And I can actually find something on my page and force a hover state for it. For example, if I go back to that button, find that button hidden in here. That is one thing that can be kind of annoying, is that if they, you know, if whoever developed the site used a lot of containers, it can be kind of annoying to try to go through all the containers to find exactly what you need. But I can find the button there. I can toggle the hover state to make the hover state active. And you can see that that's how it looks in the hover state. And I can look through the code here, the CSS, to find the CSS hover state for the button, because it's going to be in here somewhere. Right there it is, right? Fa22 hover. I can change it there. Then I can unforce hover. And then it would be permanently that style going forward, which is pretty interesting. And you can actually see, if you notice here, right, the things that I have forced hover actually have a little indicator that they have been forced in their hover state. I can even add rules here into the CSS that don't exist yet. Like I can add color white here, and I added that in the wrong place. I would actually technically like to add that here into the hover rule. Color white. And maybe color white important. Right, and then you get the white text there. Then I can unhover, and then we see the change get made on hover, right? Like, that's just the first tab, and we can see all of the value that that's providing us. Just in, this elements tab that we're working with here. The ability to edit the styles, the ability to edit the text and edit the HTML and edit everything that we see here to make temporary changes so we can see things and we can make fixes and we can try things in a temporary format so that, if we can figure them out, then we can take the fixes that we figured out. We know exactly where those fixes go now, so we could find those fixes in our larger code and apply them exactly where they need to go with the exact right code without having to kind of guess and check and stumble around and work on things, right? We can just kind of figure it out. And then when we're done and we have everything where we want it, since this is just temporary, it's just in our browser. When we refresh the page, nothing is permanent. Everything goes back to the way that it was. Right, which is pretty nice. Pretty useful. The next tab on our page The next tab that we have in our dev tools here that I want to kind of show off is the console tab. And so in our console tab, we can actually use JavaScript to actually send code commands to our browser. And we can use this to do a lot of stuff. Like one of the things that I oftentimes do is use it to say find all of a certain type of element in a page and maybe create a list of all of the certain types of elements in a page. Right, which is very useful. Right, like let's say I want to find all of the links or all of the anchor tags, right, in the Cleveland Community College website here. Well, we know from other classes I can use query selector all. So document dot query selector all on the anchor tag, and that's going to return a node list, and we can see all these items here. That is an anchor or a link on the page. Now, I could write a loop to go through all of these and figure them all out and maybe do something to them to highlight them, right? So I could write a, maybe we could create a variable like, say, var links equals document dot query selector all a, and hit enter there. And once I have that, that actually saves that variable in my session storage. So now I can create a JavaScript loop. Maybe we can do like a an enhanced for loop, right? And write a for link for var link of links, right? You can see there it remembers links. Link dot style dot border equals 3px solid yellow. And then we have every anchor tag on the page, we have it outlined in yellow. So every anchor tag, every link on the page is outlined in yellow. So just like that, I can easily identify every single link on a page. But that's not going to help me very much in creating a list of links. So there is something else that I can do here. And so one of the things that you might have seen me do before is use a console log. And so I can write a console.log, and I can use that links array variable that we created there earlier. And we can get the array of all of the links that are on the page. Right, but there are also even more different console functions that I can use here. Right, console functions, look where we're at. We're in the console. So I can console.table links, and that's going to look at that document.query selector all a, look at all the links that are in that array, and it's actually going to put them in a tabulated format in a table and give me a whole lot of good information about all of these links. So this actually gives me, one, it gives me the index location of each of these links in the list. So it gives me the number. It gives me a number and a count of each of the links. So I know there are 121 anchor tags on this page. It gives me the text for each of the links. It gives me the origin for each of the links, the protocol each of the links are using, the host, and the host name for each and every one of the links in this table. So now I have a easy to use table of all of the links on this page. This console is also a place to where I can go This is also a place that I can go if I'm having trouble with my JavaScript, if something in my JavaScript is not working, or if there's something wrong in general, with my site, one of the things that I might do is, as I'm writing functions in my JavaScript, one of the things that I might do is I might put one of these console log functions inside of one of the functions that's in my JavaScript. So then I can go to the console of my website, and I know, okay, if I see this thing, then I know that function triggered and everything's okay. But if I don't see this thing from this console log, then I know that that function for some reason didn't trigger and I need to figure it out in my JavaScript. Or I might see a little error message from my JavaScript, and it might tell me, oh, there's a syntax error on line such and such. And that can help me figure out the issues that I've made, in my code. And help me figure out problems that I've created for myself. So there's a lot of stuff that I can do with console. And again, refresh, and it goes away. Now, I do want to talk about sources. But before I talk about sources, I want to talk about something that kind of bridges a couple different gaps. I want to talk about coverage. So you see here this run command. Control-Shift-P allows you to run command. And so what's interesting is that, we've talked about things like jQuery, and we've talked about things like Bootstrap this semester. And this is actually something that can help you out when you're using things like that. Because we have a coverage tool in our inspect element, in our dev tools here, that allows us to look and see what code is being used from different libraries and different frameworks and different things that we're using, and what code is not. That way we're not using, that way we're not wasting a bunch of memory. That way we're not, wasting load time. We can refactor code to only load the things that we use. Now, I would recommend, really only kind of doing this if you kind of know what you're doing and you know what you're working with, right? Because this would also be an easy way to kind of mess some stuff up, is if you accidentally delete some code that you should have kept. But I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P here on my keyboard, Control-Shift-P to open up my command window here. And I'm going to start typing in coverage. show coverage. And it tells me there, click the reload button to reload and start capturing coverage. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm just going to click the reload button right there. And so it actually shows me a visualization there of all the different files that are being loaded, how much of that file is being used, and how much of that file is not being used. Now that is, again, when the page loads. So that could mean that it might not use the entire file when the page loads, but it might use the entire file at some point. Now, one of the problems that we have here is like this CSS file. Right, this is main.css, and we can see that 93.2% of it is not being used. So wonder why that is. We can click that, and we can see everything that's not being used when the page loads. And we can see that there's a lot of code here that is responsive code that's not being used when the page loads. A lot of code that's kind of weird. That might have just a specific purpose for a specific page that's not being used when a page loads. And then there are some things here that look like they might be a part of Bootstrap that's not being used when the page loads, but they might not be being used on this page, but they might be being used on another page. Which, is a good point to say, if you don't know exactly why a code's not being used, or if a code's not being used everywhere, you don't necessarily want to get rid of it, right? We can see the Ocelot bot, we can see what's not being used there. If we look at that, then we can see a lot of that is JavaScript, so that's probably things that aren't being called until an event occurs. Right, so that's stuff that might not necessarily run when the page loads. So that would be a thing to look at there. But, this is a thing to kind of look at and see, is there a reason for this? If there's a reason for this, then we can keep it. If there's not a reason to have this code, then maybe we can look at refactoring it and getting rid of it, or doing some sort of something that's different to get rid of the code, right? Like, for example, here, this is a CSS file that is 99.9% of it is not being used when this page loads. But it's being loaded when this page loads. So maybe we need this in another part of the site. We just maybe don't need to load it when the home page loads, right? Which is also another viable thing here. But that's coverage, and coverage is very useful. Right? And in general, our sources tab shows us all the files that are being called when our website loads. Right? So one of the things that we've kind of talked about in previous classes is that, when your browser makes a call for a website, there's a certain series of steps that's happening. And basically this sources tab here is sort of keeping track of all the files that have been called and returned for your site here. And you can see that if we look in different elements, we can see all the files that have been called and brought back. We can see, there's all the ones for the AI bot, some kind of token, there's our jQuery, minified code that's been called there. There's some Facebook tracking. There's some, different uploads there. Let's see here. Got some font calls here. Looks like some more font calls. Another different little JavaScript there. Fonts, fonts, fonts. Google Analytics. Google Tag Manager. Right, and so all of these files are being called and loaded when the page loads, and this just kind of gives you a list of all the files that have been loaded and everything that's been kind of done with them, or everything that's been just kind of loaded up there. We can kind of couple that with the application panel. The application panel works with that as well. It also gives us some information about cookies and sessions and things of that nature. You know, what we have for session storage, if anything that we might have in local storage, any service workers that might be working. Right, some of this in general, not huge deals for the majority of what we're doing, and a lot of the stuff that we get out of some of these things, especially when it comes to performance and to memory, we can get it a lot easier when we work with Lighthouse, which we'll talk about next week. Network here actually breaks down the waterfall in terms of, you know, that call and response of files of of files making it back to your browser. One of the interesting things that you can also do with this is you can actually throttle it to make it look slower, to make your internet actually appear slower, so you can see how your site might perform on a slower loading internet service, which is pretty interesting. When we look at performance here, we can hit the reload button there to start looking at a little bit of performance. We wouldn't necessarily, it's, you know, not going to go the whole time. It's just going to go for a little bit here. This actually gives us a lot of good information about what's happening as our site loads. We can see information here. It tells us, you know, where scripts are loading. It tells us where it's painting. When it says it's painting, that means when it's rendering like images and text and things on the page. You know, actually showing that stuff to you. Right? It actually shows you the process here, and you can actually visualize it and see it. And it's really, really interesting and really, really cool. For us to kind of examine. So in a nutshell, I think that's all I want us to kind of have a look at this week. There's also the security panel here that just gives us some information about, you know, any you know, site certificates, things of that nature. That's all there, right? So one of the things that we'll do next week is we'll talk about Lighthouse, what Lighthouse is, what Lighthouse does. We'll generate a Lighthouse report, and we'll see how Lighthouse works. Lighthouse basically takes a lot of the things that we can do manually with a lot of these other tabs, and it automates it and makes it a lot more efficient and easier and friendlier for us to use. So that'll be what we do next week for our live class, is have a look at Lighthouse. So this is where we'll stop today. I'll go ahead and pause here. I will turn the music back on and just kind of hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes, just in case anybody who's watching live has any questions. If you're watching the recording and you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message, and I will answer you to the best of my ability. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.